This is the official Above the Break trade deadline special. As always, I'm your host, Ian Haig. Real quick, before we get into anything, don't forget to like, don't forget to subscribe. I appreciate it. All the love, all the subs, all the comments, etc., etc., etc. Look, if you're watching the video, just go ahead. Just pop on down there. You know what I mean? In the time that it's taken me to basically grovel for your subscription, you could have already done it and I could have already moved on. All right, now let's move on. So, obviously this trade deadline was pretty insane, right? For a lot of different reasons. We had Luka, we had De'Aaron Fox, Zach LaVine, a lot of different stuff. And before I get into the official winners and losers, when you have deadlines such as this one, where a lot of teams made good moves, at least in my opinion, there were more teams that made good moves than bad moves. But as a consequence of a lot of teams making good moves, there's going to be more teams that made bad moves than any given normal year, right? Just with the frequency that win-win trades exist, even you look at things 4, 5, 6 years down the line, there's very rarely that the asset pool is even. Now, you'll trade a lot of times, hey, like if you were the Clippers, for example, and Paul George ended up netting you a championship with Kawhi. You don't care that Shai Gilgeous-Alexander is a top 2 MVP candidate right now, and the Thunder are what they are. You don't care about that. Now, when things work out like they did for the Clippers in the Paul George era, maybe you're a little bit upset about it. But nonetheless, we'll talk about some of the wins, some of the losses. I think you're going to be surprised. There's going to be a lot of trades, so don't expect every move to get talked about. But if you watched last episode, you'll know that I told you guys, don't expect every move to be a blockbuster move and be appreciative of these smaller, somewhat inconsequential moves. At least they might seem that way. But there's a lot of teams that got better. There's a lot of teams that made impactful moves, set themselves up for the future, etc., 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 that I think is going to be important to talk about. But not just that, from the sense of we have some teams who historically have not made intelligent front office decisions, who at this deadline made some moves that I think not only just went against tendency, but really and truly were impactful moves for the franchise in the future, whether that was through acquiring young players, draft capital, or a combination of the two. There were some teams that really capitalized on assets that they had who, as I said, may not have done so in the past. Wow, that was happening. There were some other front offices who have been terrible and continue to be terrible. The Bulls being one of them. I talked about them a little bit. We'll talk about them down the line here. But without further ado, let's get right into it. The first winner that we got, and these are not necessarily ranked, I would say, I guess, loosely ranked. When I was doing my research and compiling all the stuff I wanted to compile for this video, there were just some immediate things that came to my mind. Now, a note on this: Luka Doncic trade, De'Aaron Fox trade / Zach LaVine trade, stuff that I talked about in the previous episode. I'm not going to touch on too much in this one, nor did I factor them in too greatly into the overall winners and losers. Although I will say, in terms of the Lakers, where I have them in my winners, spoiler alert, is not necessarily indicative of how highly I thought about their deadline as a whole. But anyway, we'll get straight into it. First team up is the Toronto Raptors. Look, man, only giving up Bruce Brown, Kelly Olynyk, and an Indiana first that's top 4 protected. Indiana looks good. Indiana's going to be good for the next few years. It's not a super valuable pick. And a second just to buy low on Brandon Ingram. You take a swing on Brandon Ingram, versatile wing scorer. His game has really matured in New Orleans. He's had some good playoff moments. Obviously, he's hurt now. He hasn't played since December 7th. Still dealing with that ankle sprain injury. But even if he doesn't play this year, if you're Toronto, you're okay being bad. And then you add him next to Scotty. This is assuming he signs an extension. In my opinion, if you're Toronto, I don't think you trade for him if you're not going to offer him extension or you don't expect him to sign there. I would expect him to sign there if they do offer an extension. I don't really know what the Brandon Ingram market looks like. The Pelicans were never going to extend him, hence why they traded him for what they did. But you weren't going to just let him walk for nothing, again, if you're the Pelicans. But this could be cool, man. You probably get him on a slightly budget deal, right? He was looking for a max. You'll probably have to pay him just about the max, but I think if you could convince him to be a part of a collective and you pay him just slightly below the max, I think you could get a really good deal there. And this team looks good moving forward. Yeah, you don't have Davion Mitchell anymore. I honestly don't hate that they moved him. You get back a second to essentially replace the one that you moved for Brandon Ingram. PJ Tucker is just PJ Tucker. You absorb his contract. Like I said about when he got moved to the Jazz, before he got moved to the Heat, before he got moved to the Raptors. Rough week for PJ, I guess. He's probably just chilling at the crib, just paying it no mind. He's just collecting a check at this point. But they got some stuff that's building. There was some swirling talks that Jakob Poeltl could get moved at the deadline too. There were some teams calling for him. Obviously, nothing ended up formulating on that end, but you could move him in the offseason, right? Depending on where your pick is, depending on who you take, depending on what the roster construction looks like and how much money you have left over. Again, assuming you're re-signing Brandon Ingram. You could do something. I've talked about the Raptors before as a team that I like what they've done this year. They're losing in a way that is conducive to player development. Right? What do we see from these teams, these young teams? It's their first playoff run. They haven't made it into a deep playoff run. They just don't have the composure in those late game situations to really excel and thrive in those. And that's, what all championship teams have to do in some regard. And so they're playing teams tight down the stretch. Good teams, too. They're playing the Celtics tight. They're playing the Cavs tight. They're playing the Knicks tight, right? These are competitive games where you're forcing upper echelon Eastern Conference teams to not just leave their starters out there late in the fourth quarter, but really have to fight and claw to beat you down the stretch. And by adding just another piece who, honestly, in my opinion, kind of complements well. Obviously, he needs the ball a lot, but R.J. Barrett has taken a leap as a playmaker this year. Scotty Barnes has always been an excellent passer. Jakob Poeltl's an excellent passer. So you don't necessarily need him to be a all-around type of player. You really just need him to be an offensive boost. Another guy who's a good scorer from all three levels, can always create his own shot, can get to the free throw line. He plays really well in the half court, which Scotty Barnes has struggled with at times this year. He's really consistently scoring in the half court, especially when you have help digging down on you, right? When he's working at the block or he's working at the elbow, high post area in general. He loves to be there. Adding Brandon Ingram takes even more attention off of Scotty Barnes and allows him to get to the rim even easier. So I really like this deadline in general for them. Whatever it looks like, just taking a chance on Brandon Ingram. I've been begging teams to take a chance on one of Zion or Brandon Ingram just as a buy low situation, and whatever you get, you get. You didn't have to pay a lot for it. So I think the Raptors are in a really good situation. The Hornets are my next team. Yeah, you could look at it like, why are we trading Mark Williams? And I think that's certainly a perspective to have, but Dalton Knecht, Cam Reddish, an unprotected 2031 Lakers first-round pick. I talked about what that Suns pick looks like for the Jazz, right? And what that pick could end up being. I honestly think similarly about this Lakers pick. Obviously with the caveat that we're uncertain if Luka Doncic long term is going to be in Los Angeles. Obviously 100% Luka contingent. If he leaves in 2 years, doesn't sign an extension, and goes to play with Jokic, which I really hope not for the sake of the league, but wherever, where if he just leaves LA, all of a sudden you're looking at the Hornets with one of the most coveted future assets in the league. LeBron will be gone. Luka, who you just traded, your next best player for, Anthony Davis, is not on the team, and really you don't know what you're looking like. Obviously, if you're the Lakers, you're hoping that doesn't happen, but from the Hornets' perspective, it seems like a pretty good situation. You get another 20-30 pick swap, and then in another deal, you just eat the contract of Nurkic for an extra year, and you get another first. I think when you look at things, maybe they were a little bit... I haven't seen any reports come out of Charlotte as to why they would want to move him, right? He's 22, 23 years old, highest standing reach in the NBA, freakishly athletic. His issue, like other freakishly athletic bigs in the NBA, is the ability to stay on the court. He's had some injuries. This guy hasn't even played barely over 50 career games. And when I talked about the Hornets on the last episode, I was excited about the LaMelo, Brandon Miller, Mark Williams timeline. But really what I think the Hornets are preparing themselves for is to do what some people have been, I don't know, necessarily suggesting, more so predicting, is the eventual trade of LaMelo Ball. And maybe this is where you could see, again, we're kind of digging into hypotheticals here, so I won't touch on it too much. But, maybe the Hornets and the Lakers link up. LaMelo's an LA boy, and maybe that diminishes a little bit. Although if you're the Hornets, in your own self-interest, especially with this 2031 pick, you probably don't do that. But, you now shift the timeline back just a little bit to kind of reset yourself up. Dalton Knecht obviously is older than Mark Williams. Cam Reddish older than Mark Williams. But these are guys that kind of help give you a little bit more depth. Moussa Diabate has been really good for the Hornets this year in the stead of Mark Williams. And I don't know if they just said, hey, Moussa's been good enough, so Mark Williams, see you later, buddy. But this is kind of what we're looking at. And really from a team who you kind of didn't know what they were doing, but you're almost rebuilding in the middle of a rebuild, right? You kind of looked at like I said, that three-man core that they had, and you thought that, oh, hey, this could be the foundation to put some pieces around to go be a playoff team, and maybe even if things work out perfectly in your favor and these players develop properly, a championship team. But I think all in all, getting what you did, still stashing your first-round picks. You have your own pick for each of the next 7 years, so even if this doesn't work out and you're still bad, you have your own draft asset control. You have a bunch of swaps, and you have assets of teams who are aging who could turn into really good picks 4, 5, 6 years down the line and boost either as a trade piece to go get a superstar, or you land on those draft picks to turn into good quality championship level players. Next team is the Kings, right? We talked about the De'Aaron Fox trade and getting Zach LaVine and how that was a really good kind of middle ground for them, and I was actually pleasantly surprised that they were even able to get that level of return for De'Aaron Fox. When we see players who give their preferred destinations, or essentially say, I want to go here, or I'm only going here, I'm forcing my way to this destination, you remove a lot of a team's leverage. And so, maybe preying on the Bulls, the Kings were able to get some stuff. But really what I think helps a lot is also getting Jake LaRavia. I would fully expect Jake LaRavia to get re-signed, right? He's expiring this offseason. But in the Grizzlies system this year, he's been amazing, shooting 44% from three on just under 4 attempts a game. He's a really underrated passer. He's a pretty good defender. I wouldn't say by any stretch he's any sort of elite defender, but he's definitely not a liability in any stretch, and he can get you some stops. But really what I think is his most underrated attribute, and this has, again, been supremely highlighted with the system that the Grizzlies have run this year, is he's just a great mover without the basketball. He runs the break really well. He understands where to put himself in positions to provide quality spacing and not only make his life easier and get him good open jump shots, but helping guys like Desmond Bane, John Morant, Jaren Jackson Jr. have clean rim runs, or at least cleaner rim runs, because he's such a threat and he's such a great spacer. So, you give up Alex Len, you give up Colby Jones. There are a couple guys who were part of your rotation but didn't play a ton and weren't necessarily a part of the long-term core. Colby Jones has looked cool in spots this year, but I don't know that he necessarily has a true home as of right now. Maybe, going to Memphis, he figures something out, but we'll see what that looks like. But again, just really good stabilization post De'Aaron Fox. There's a lot of franchises that when they trade their superstar player, as I talked about in the intro, right, there's not a lot of win-win trades. And, one that guts my heart, even to this day, you could probably tell by the memorabilia in the background, I'm a Boston Red Sox fan. And if you don't know who Mookie Betts is, go look him up. The guy's a Hall of Famer, in my opinion. But you trade him. And the return you get back just doesn't really ever formulate anything. And we, as Red Sox fans, are still sitting here to this day being like, man, why on earth would we ever get rid of him? And now we don't need to touch on that too long, but the Kings, at least from what it appears now, have somehow found a way to move their superstar. And while they haven't, looked great in Zach LaVine's first 2 games, I think moving forward, you at least have some sort of reasonable foundation to, if this doesn't work out, you have guys you can move to get some assets back. You have some young, interesting players. Like, this isn't a complete dumpster fire for the Kings. And again, I said it on the last pod too with the LaVine deal. Maybe this is just the front office throwing a bone to Kings fans, right? I don't know that these deals are necessarily in the best interest of them long term to maximize on their situation, but it's certainly something to give the fans to say, hey, we didn't give you one playoff appearance and then we're all of a sudden just going to go back to being bad and incompetent again. So for both the Kings franchise and Kings fans, I think this is a good place for them to be moving forward in general. The Cavaliers are kind of an underrated winner, in my opinion. They made just the one move, and it was basically a buzzer beater on deadline day, just a little bit before that official 3 p.m. Eastern time deadline hit. But they get DeAndre Hunter from the Hawks, and what you gave up is really, in the face of competing for a championship, nothing. Georges Niang, I'm not super high on who Niang is as a player. I don't think he's a very good player, personally. Karis LeVert's streaky, microwave scorer, just not really what the Cavs needed, especially with what Ty Jerome has been this year, right? Maybe if Ty Jerome doesn't take this leap, maybe you covet Karis LeVert a little bit more to provide you that spark of bench scoring, but like I said, Ty Jerome has been great. Craig Porter, honestly, as of late, has really come on strong, and so you kind of view Karis LeVert as expendable. 3 seconds and 2 future second-round swaps, cool. Like, you know what I mean? Whatever. Get him out of here. Get the deal over the line. And you get a guy who, throughout his career, has been a versatile wing scorer who had a little bit of an offensive game, but never really anything consistent or never really what we expected him to be coming out of Virginia. But this year, coming off the bench has just supremely unlocked DeAndre Hunter. And he's been starting since Jalen Johnson's been hurt and really not dropped off at all. It's been a consistent theme. And whether you choose to start DeAndre Hunter or start Max Strus, whatever. But he's averaging a career high in points, 19. Again, mostly off the bench this year. And he's shooting a career high from 3 on a career high in attempts as well. So for a Cavs team who was maybe, you had wing depth, but really nobody that stood out, right? The biggest deal with Isaac Okoro was the consistency of shooting. That's not something that you're going to struggle and have an issue with Max Strus or with Isaac Okoro, And then Max Strus, really, DeAndre Hunter is just a better defending Max Strus, in my opinion. He's longer, he's more athletic, he moves his feet better. And I think he's every bit as good of a shooter, at least this season he has been, as Max Strus. That's not to say Max Strus is a bad player, but DeAndre Hunter is certainly an upgrade, and that's one thing that the Cavs really, the only place that they were lacking. And I think, really, you look at it, this is probably the most competitive matchup-wise they've had with the Celtics as that's who they're trying to dethrone in their quest, right? Since they got Donovan Mitchell, since they got Mobley, Darius Garland, whatnot, since this core has come together. Really, the issue has been, hey, we have great bigs, we have good guards, we have no wings. And if you watch hoops, the way to beat the Celtics, you need wing defending. Their two best players are wings. You need them. And so really, I think this gives them even more. And obviously, they lost the other night to Boston, but Cleveland looks good, dude. Cleveland looks scary. They're 40-9, and they get even more help. If anything short of an Eastern Conference Finals appearance, for me, would be a failure for the Cavaliers. I fully expect them to make a really, really deep playoff run. They have the depth. They have the right personnel. It's just all about executing to get them there. The Miami Heat are huge winners for me, and honestly, I probably put them too low in my loose rankings, right? You get Jimmy Butler off the books, you get back Kyle Anderson, Andrew Wiggins, first-round pick. Dennis Schroeder's in the deal too. He gets redirected to Detroit. But for a guy that didn't want to be there, who wasn't helping you win, for you to get really anything that provides you some sort of substantial value, I think is huge for the Heat. Kyle Anderson is a great vet. He's a very versatile player. He can do a whole lot of things for a team to help them win. It's the whole reason why the Warriors got him in the offseason to begin with. And Andrew Wiggins, former All-Star, was a huge part of that Warriors team in 22. But he is kind of exactly what this Heat team has needed, especially considering the jump that Tyler Hero has taken this year. First-time All-Star. He's really taking command from a floor general perspective, right? Really running the offense. When he was coming out of Kentucky, he was mostly just looked at as a scoring guard, not much of a passer, not much of a really great facilitator or playmaker, but this year he's kind of been forced into that role, and he's been very, very, very good. And so when you look at, just complementary defenders, guys who can shoot the three ball, that's what every team needs. Every team needs those type of players. You honestly get back two guys that are exceptional. Yeah, you move Josh Richardson in another deal, but you also get back Davion Mitchell, who, again, as I said, with Tyler Hero really taking a leap playmaking-wise, you don't necessarily need a Tyus Jones-type guard to come in and run your offense, Trey Jones, those type of guys. You're okay with Davion Mitchell, a guy who's not necessarily going to run the team, but he's going to come in and be an elite defender, shoot the three ball sometimes, and just be gritty. And honestly, for the Heat, what more can you ask for? That's Heat culture right there. Davion Mitchell is. And so them being 5-5 in their last 10, going to the All-Star break, they really need this help moving forward. I talked about the Spurs already in the last episode. And for me, they're a winner simply because of De'Aaron Fox. They're even more of a winner because you hold on to the pieces you held on to in that deal. Right? They almost let go of the rope in Atlanta on Wednesday, but they didn't. But the real big thing for me is just how they looked, to be honest, right? When you consider what the offense has looked like in the past, they really needed, Chris Paul wasn't going to be impactful enough, all respect due to Chris Paul. He's just not dynamic enough of a scorer anymore in terms of getting guys in their spots, making sure things are the way that they should be, right? Like the offense is flowing how it's intended to flow. Chris Paul is the guy. But you needed really just another punch, a really 2 to Wemby's 1, and you can argue who's better between him and Fox right now. But there's consistency there, and there's another option there, and there's attention away from the existing talent on the team. De'Aaron Fox, let me pull up this Bobby Marks tweet. De'Aaron Fox is the first player in Spurs franchise history with 20 and 10 in his debut. He ended up with 26 and 13. He didn't shoot particularly well in the clutch, which is honestly a large part of why that 20-point lead dwindled down and came down to literally the final free throws of the game, where Wemby almost had an insane putback and one. If you get some more stabilization, you get some more consistency, and you get the young guys to settle down a little bit when it really starts to tighten up, right? And, sphincters start to squeeze a little bit in crunch time, this team could be really, really good. Obviously, we've talked about them in the last trade, or in the last pod with the De'Aaron Fox trade, but the Spurs have to be winners, right? The Lakers, as I kind of alluded to in the intro, not just for Luka, but the Mark Williams trade as well, I view them as winners. Mark Williams is the perfect fit alongside Luka. It's the archetype of center that has always thrived with this, whether it was James Harden or now with Luka. This is the center that these type of players need to run that high screen and roll with. You get a guy that has some insane athleticism, great reach, verticality, match made in heaven, right? And really what didn't make me put the Lakers as more of a strong and clear winner in the deadline is just the hesitancy with health. LeBron's getting older, and as much of a Iron Man as he's been in his career, we've seen in the last 3-4 years, his body is kind of slowly deteriorating on him as he ages. It was always going to happen. As much of a super soldier human that LeBron James is, it was eventually going to happen. Luka is obviously a guy, as we know, has dealt with injuries and has had issues staying on the court. Mark Williams as well. Like I said, he's played like 56, I think, career games. That's kind of scary when you think about it. A huge part of what goes into teams making these deep runs and winning championships is being on the right side of health. How many teams have we seen that we thought were absolute shoo-ins, guaranteed title winners, or at least finals appearances, and they couldn't make it out of the first round because their team was never healthy, right? Giannis, for like 3 years after they win the championship, somebody is hurt on that Bucks team, and they can't win, whether it was Giannis or Middleton or whoever it was. You just don't have health on your side, and so you just got to knock on wood, cross your fingers, whatever superstitions you want to do if you're a Lakers fan, and pray for health. And then you got to pray that Luka and LeBron can not only figure out how to play off each other, but coexist and thrive in the offense. I think Mark Williams is going to be a really good fit. Somebody asked LeBron after the game today, the Warriors game, what he thought about the Mark Williams acquisition, and he has no idea. He said something about like young center, athletic center. I haven't had time to watch the film. Once LeBron finds out what Mark Williams can really do when he's healthy, bro, I think they'll be all right. I think they'll be all right. My last winner, and one that you're probably sitting here, if I gave you, there's 30 teams. Let's say I gave you 10 guesses to give me your winners for the deadline. The Washington Wizards would not be one of them. I can almost guarantee it. But it's hard to overlook what the Wizards were actually capable of doing this deadline. And this is one of the front offices that I said historically has not made great decisions, but this deadline they decided to just break the curse, or maybe they just decided to get out of their own way, right? You think back, this is a front office that gave Bradley Beal not just a supermax, which they should not have done, but they gave him the full no-trade clause. That is the whole reason the Phoenix Suns didn't get to do anything at the deadline this year. But you trade Kyle Kuzma, who, in my opinion, has been extremely detrimental to the development. There are times he hijacks the offense. There are times that he's just not where he's supposed to be or even really playing hard. And I get it when you're kind of just rotting away and it feels like your career's not going anywhere in Washington on a perennial bottom feeder of the East. It can be tough to get up and play these games. And we'll see what he does in Milwaukee. We'll see how much he really impacts them. I'm not sure. But like I said, we'll see. He could turn it around. He could look more like the Lakers version of Kyle Kuzma that is a champion and was an actual contributor to a championship team. But you trade Kuzma and Patrick Baldwin, cool. But you end up with some guys who are young, have tons of potential, but you also get two guys in Marcus Smart and Chris Middleton who, one, can help mentor the youth, and at least in the case of Marcus Smart, I can speak for definitively, would embrace that role and would absolutely love that role. He was even doing a little bit of that in Memphis, although not much on the court, mostly in street clothes. But both of those guys have an extra year on their deals. So you could either move them in the offseason or at the deadline next year. Chris Middleton does have a player option. It's like a $46 million player option. I can't see a world where he doesn't sign that. I want to just double check the valuation of this. But it's like I said, it's a player option. So if he opts in, more power to you, or you buy him out. I don't know how many people get bought out of. Actually, it's a $34 million player option. Even better. That's a movable contract in this day and age of the NBA. He's not making $60 million, Jimmy Butler, right? He's not making some insurmountable amount of cash that it makes it extremely difficult to move. $34 million is two role players in this economy. And so you have a guy who, again, is just another asset. And so it was very obvious what the Wizards were planning on doing or what their mindset was just in the offseason with the Valanciunas signing, with the Brogdon signing. And now the Brogdon signing hasn't netted you anything in terms of assets yet. Valanciunas has, right? Nobody wanted to give him a deal. You said, whatever, come here, make 10 mil. That's a reasonably sized contract to get moved. You get a little bit of a bag. You can come off the bench so we can let our rookies and our young guys develop. And then we move you to a team that's trying to make the playoffs at the deadline. And honestly, I thought more teams would be willing to do this, but with the way that the second apron operates, it's hard to make moves sometimes. Now, we thought that there would be some issues with guys getting moved because of the CBA and because of aprons, but I went and looked at it. There's only about 6 or 7 teams that are actually in that first or second apron range. And I think there's only 3 teams that are actually in the second apron. So when you look at things, right, there, when there's a ton of payroll to go around and you have these teams that can absorb money, what's the harm in signing a 31, 32, 33-year-old vet on a relatively team-friendly deal that you can go get draft capital for? You walk out with Sidy Cissoko, Colby Jones, A.J. Johnson, and draft capital for essentially just being a salary dump destination, trading a guy who wasn't a long-term fit anyway, and taking a gamble and just throwing a little bit of money at a free agent. That's good business. That's good front office and roster management from a team who, like I said, just hasn't been able to really put together a string of whether it was draft picks, right? Johnny Davis was a miss. He got moved. You take a swing at Marvin Bagley. He just hasn't worked out. He gets moved. But you kind of got some stuff here. Jordan Poole, I think, was a good risk to just go and throw some money at. I think he's going to be a lot better without Kuzma there. Bilal Coulibaly, I think, is going to be a freak. He's one of those young Kawhi Leonard type guys that if his offense ever catches up with his defense, it's going to be really scary. I've talked about Bub Carrington. I love Bub Carrington. Alex Sarr looks like he could be decent. Even Corey Kispert, if you don't think Corey Kispert age-wise really fits, right, he's a little bit older. I think he's at that 24, 25 range, right? Most of the other young guys on the team are, in that 19, 20, 21, Keyshawn George included. So even if you move Corey Kispert, teams are going to call for Corey Kispert. 3-and-D, elite shooter, good movement shooter. You always need shooting. You always need defense. Somebody's going to call for Corey Kispert if you decide to move him. But really, you have set yourself up as a franchise to get the snowball rolling of momentum and consecutive positive progression moves so that you don't end up being the worst team in basketball for 7 years and not looking like there's much future. We'll see what it looks like. Again, with young players, especially guys like A.J. Johnson, who really don't have a ton of film that you can look at, but has great tools and can really develop. Who knows what these guys can turn into, and maybe they turn into impactful franchise players. Moving on to the losers. Some of these teams, you just scratch your head, and not that these were necessarily bad moves, but there'll be a consistent theme here. Just a lack of moves. And I get maybe that's just slightly unfair to the front office. It goes underappreciated sometimes, I think, how difficult it can be to get these teams to either just buy into a deal or really just let these deals formulate. Whether it's money, whether it's valuation of prospects and assets, whatever it looks like, it can be extremely difficult. So I don't want to go too hard on some of these teams that didn't make moves because a lot of times it's not up to you, right? I can't trade somebody that nobody wants. Just is what it is. Or if I don't want to come down off my asking price, whatever, right? But the Grizzlies were the first team that I had for the losers. And while I understand Jake LaRavia trading, he's an expiring contract. You don't want to let him walk for nothing, but you weren't going to pay him because you're in the offseason. You're more than likely just planning on extending all three of your guys, right? But you had a perfect opportunity to go and get a guy like Cam Johnson, who, as evidenced by him still being a Brooklyn Net post-deadline, there wasn't a huge market for. And so, despite the fact that all the news has pointed and indicated to the Nets wanting and essentially demanding 2 first-round picks for Cam Johnson, which, if you ask me, way too steep, you could have gotten it for less than that. You could have used the Marcus Smart contract. The money matches up almost perfectly. And even if it didn't, you could have absorbed more. You're well under even just the first apron. And again, I get you have to extend your guys, and this is the offseason you're going to do it. But it just felt like you're a top 4 seed right now. Even better than that, you're the second best seed you're the second best team in the West. But when I look at the roster, I don't see a consistent half-court score. And in the past, when the Grizzlies have been in the playoffs with this core, it's been Ja Morant. And he's been a little bit more like Ja Morant lately than he has been, but he doesn't look like the Ja Morant that we saw go toe-to-toe with LeBron or go toe-to-toe with the Warriors, right? This is not the same guy, and you can speculate about the reasoning all you want, but I'm more here to focus on the reality of it. You needed more spacing, and especially if you were going to move Jake LaRavia, you needed somebody to replace that. And I just don't see where it's coming from, especially at the wing position. They're a reasonably deep team, but again, when you get to the playoffs, you're not running 8, 9, 10, 11-man rotations. Typically, you're only bringing 2, maybe 3 guys off the bench, depending on what the matchup in the series looks like. And for the Grizzlies, you're a team, again, you're the second seed. Can I see them going on the road to Denver and closing out a series? Can I see them beating Oklahoma City 4 out of 7 games? Can I see them beating the Rockets 4 out of 7 times? Now, the Rockets, of the top 4 seeds in the West, would be the one that I would have the most faith in the Grizzlies to beat. But that's only because of the Rockets' deficiencies and not necessarily the Grizzlies' proficiencies. And I don't want this to get misconstrued. I like the Grizzlies, excuse me. They're a really good team, and especially considering the leap that Jaren Jackson Jr. has taken this year, that's really what's propelled them in this next year after being healthy into where they are. Now, obviously, you get some help from some rookies who are playing well above, I think, what we would have expected them to be like, right? There was a lot of people who were kind of hot and cold on Zach Edey, not really sure what his impact was going to be. But I think in the role that Zach Edey's in, it's perfect. We're not asking Zach Edey to be the scorer that he was or the offensive engine that he was at Purdue. He's there to rebound, rim protect, and get easy baskets against mismatches. And set just good, hard screens. He's a large dude. He's a huge man. And size is everything in the NBA anymore. And if you have size and just a little bit of skill, teams are going to find ways to utilize you. And so, you put spacing, you give a lot of motion, you get some good duck-ins, some good looks from Zach Edey. But Jalen Wells, too, has been amazing. Way better than you would ever expect a flyer second-round pick to do. But this dude's out here guarding number one options. The three ball's a little bit streaky, but, he's had games. He had 8 threes in Sacramento. He's had 35-plus points this year. Or at least 30-plus, I should say. And as a rookie, you'll absolutely take that, whether that's starting or whether that's off the bench. I just think that they needed something else. And like I said, especially when you move Jake LaRavia, Marvin Bagley, what does that really do for you at the end of the day? It's just weird. I'm not totally out on them, and I'm not even super strong and spirited in calling them losers, but they didn't do anything to help themselves, and they gave up a valuable piece. To me, that has to be a loser. The next loser is the Bulls. That's pretty clear. It's pretty obvious. We went over all the Levine stuff, right? I criticized their front office in the last episode, and I won't do too much this one, but it really just not being able to move Vucevic hurts. He's probably just going to be on the team to the end of his contract now, and that's probably a tough pill to swallow for Bulls fans. It's probably an even tougher pill to swallow when you hear what the front office has to say about it. I just think there's a complete lack of self-awareness for them to think of themselves as a team who has a real chance to do anything in the playoffs and just accept the mediocrity that is the play-in. That's where they're at. I don't know that you have a future superstar on the roster. Your best guy, or at least in my opinion, the guy that has the most star potential is Kobe White, but Kobe White's not 21, right? Kobe White doesn't necessarily fit the timeline. Now, maybe he fits the timeline if you're vying for the 8th seed. That's cool, but again, we talk about this basketball limbo, right? This sort of like in-between space that teams exist in that is really kind of just the death of a franchise in a lot of ways, or maybe just a shallow period in the franchise. But you're not good, but you're not bad, right? So I'm not getting a top 5 pick. I'm not getting a potentially... I'm not giving myself the highest opportunity or highest percent chance at a franchise-altering star. But at the same time, I'm not really competing for anything. I'm kind of just in the middle. I'm just accumulating late lottery picks and overpaid role players. And that's what you end up doing. And that's probably what's going to end up happening when you pay Josh Giddey $25, $28 million a year in the offseason. When you still have to hold on to Vucevic. You don't know what to do with Kobe White. You don't know what to do with Ayo Dosunmu. Right? You didn't want to move Ayo at the deadline because you wanted him and you wanted to build, but I guess they just love the 4 point guard lineup. Smadas Buzelis can barely even start, and he is hooping. He is hooping, and he can't even get run in the starting lineup over Patrick Williams, of all people. It's just confusing. The Bulls are the Bulls, I guess. I don't know. It's just a weird spot. The Hawks were another loser for me. and this might come as a surprise, but trading DeAndre Hunter is one thing. The return you get for it, Georges Niang and Karis LeVert, you're a front office that has come out and said you're trying to move in a new direction, and you trade him to a team that doesn't have young assets. And I get it. The Cavs are really the only suitor, and they were a pretty aggressive suitor, I would say, right? From the time that we heard about this deal kind of getting in motion and the time it got done was pretty quick. But then you trade Bogey. You trade Bogey Bogdanovic. And you get back Terrence Mann. And you get back Bones Highland. And I sit here and I look at Terrence Mann. He's 3 years younger than Bogey. He makes the same amount of money. And he has an extra year on the deal. And what does Bones Highland do for you? I think we've seen what Bones Highland is in the NBA. I think he's been at enough spots and played enough for us to get a pretty good idea of what he is and what he can be. And at the end of the day, you can only have so many defensive liabilities on your team. And with as bad of a defender as Trae Young is, now he's been better this year, and I think a lot of that just has to do with his desire to compete on that end. I'm sure Dyson Daniels being there helps. I'm sure the rise of Jalen Johnson has helped. But he's not going to play a lot, and you give up 3 seconds. And I get it at this day and age in the NBA, seconds get tossed around like it's nothing, right? They're worth something in some cases, but then other cases they're not worth a lot. It's just interesting, like the front office's mindset indication in comparison with the asset recuperation from trading these players just doesn't really add up a lot in my head. And now you got reports that Trae Young's unhappy, and now you're probably going to have to move Trae Young, and the most likely destination is no longer there with the Spurs because they got their point guard. So it's just a weird situation for the Hawks, and honestly, I kind of feel bad for Trae Young. You were a team that was felt like if Jalen Johnson was healthy, you could have done some stuff. They've shown some signs of improvement, some signs of life this year, but I don't know. We'll see. My last loser for the trade deadline, again, pretty obviously here, I think, is the Suns. It's not even really the front office's fault. It really just comes down to Bradley Beal as to why they didn't make a super impactful move at the deadline. And I can't even really be mad at Bradley Beal, right? The whole reasoning he gave was just not wanting to move his family again. And at 33, 34, that's something I can appreciate. And, you don't necessarily want to just get tossed to the destitute lands of Charlotte or Washington as an older player, a guy who wants to win, a guy who wants to compete. Not to mention you're in Phoenix. Phoenix is a great place to live. I wouldn't want to leave if I was living in Phoenix either, making $55 million a year. I'd be living the dream. But, Nick Richards is a cool signing. You get off the Nurkic contract, which I do think is actually a win for them. But it's just that the roster hasn't looked great, right? The roster construction hasn't looked great. And I hope this instance in this era of Phoenix Suns basketball is a big enough sample size for Matt Ishbia to realize that investing your entire salary cap into 3 players has not ever worked out. I don't think. Maybe the Heat are the only instance that you could look at with that. But even then, it's not like the Heat had bad role players. It's not like they just had guys on minimum contracts who were bums that they were just hoping would play well. Same thing goes for the 08 Celtics. Right, these are teams that had actual good, competent, respected around the league role players. I don't think the Phoenix Suns have that. Grayson Allen's great. Tyce Jones, is great. Ryan Dunn's going to be awesome, but I don't know that he is consistent enough, especially just as a rookie, and that just comes with being a rookie, to really help you at a deep playoff run. It's just not going to cut it in the Western Conference. when you look at the teams that are around the Suns, you look at the teams that made moves at the deadline. Maybe you're a play-in team, but again, can I see this team making a deep playoff run and or winning a championship with the current construction of the roster? It would have to take 2021 Brooklyn Nets Kevin Durant and 2021 Phoenix Suns Devin Booker for this to happen, and Bradley Beal would have to show much more of his former self as well for this to really happen. But really, outside of all of that, they got to be healthy. 1-10 without Kevin Durant on the floor. You're 24-15 with him. If you're just 500 without him, you're at a much different spot. In fact, you're actually in a top 6 seed, and you're actually right next to the Lakers if you just go 500 without Kevin Durant. So while the sky is not necessarily falling in Phoenix, for what the expectations of this team are and what they were able to construct at the deadline, it's just not great and not everything you would have wanted for if you're a Phoenix Suns fan or if you're a member of the front office and maybe you ask them and their priorities are different. Yeah, they would have liked to have Jimmy Butler. That didn't work out. So I focus on getting Kevin Durant healthy, focus on getting Devin Booker back to playing Devin Booker type basketball, and let's hope we can get hot. Thank you to everyone that made it this far and listened this deep into the episode. I said it on the last one. I'm going to continue to say it. It really does mean a lot. I can understand the hesitation and maybe the potential turnoff of seeing a channel that has 15, 25, however many subscribers I have when this video comes out. Very few subscribers, brand new channel, and you're asking yourself, where's the credibility? What exactly am I getting from watching this channel? And the one thing I just want to say to you is one word: authenticity. I am never going to pretend to you that I am the most educated basketball fan, viewer, podcaster, whatever you want to label me. There is somebody that knows more about basketball than I do. What I do think I offer is just a unique perspective. I didn't grow up in basketball, and I'm learning. I'm still learning. There's still so much that I don't understand about basketball and why stuff gets done. But I'm transparent about that. And really, what I'm trying to do, not just with this show, but just with basketball in general, is bring fresh eyes to what I think is a tired viewership. I think this is a viewership of NBA fans as a whole that maybe not some of the younger generation, but you watched Kobe and you watched Shaq and you watched Mike, and even some people watching today in my dad's generation, you watched Magic, you watched Bird, you watched these larger than life figures play the game of basketball. And maybe you feel like you don't have those anymore outside of the Kevin Durant's, the Steph Curry's, the LeBron James. And if you're one of those people and you feel turned off from the league because of what the player base either stands for, how you view them, how you perceive them, what you think about them, whatever that is, just have just an ounce of open-mindedness. I think sometimes we get so caught up in how easy the game looks sometimes, and how sometimes we think NBA players are lazy or aren't playing with effort or aren't playing hard, right? This has been a theme that I've seen across Boston Celtics Twitter for a while this season, right? This whole idea of championship hangover, or these guys just don't want it anymore, whatever it is. They make it look so much easier than it actually is. And this is a concept to me that I thought was common sense around consuming professional sports, not just basketball. How many of us played in high school? How many of us wanted to or had dreams of, whether they were real or not, or whether they were even within the realm of possibility or not, wanted to play professional sports, be in the NFL, be in the NBA, be in the MLB. Most of us who are sports fans now played the sport and wanted to be in the position that these athletes are in. And so when we sit here and we criticize players for effort or for energy or for what we perceive to be them just slacking off in a game, I want you to remember that we didn't make it. Who are we to criticize effort when we don't know what it takes to get up and play 82 games? We don't know what it takes to play a travel back-to-back, where I was in Miami one game and now I got to get up and play a back-to-back in Phoenix or Houston or Dallas, where I got off a red eye. We landed off the plane at 4:30 a.m. and I got to play a game at 7 o'clock tonight, and my whole circadian rhythm's thrown off, and I have to sleep at 10 a.m. or whatever that looks like. I don't think we truly appreciate how difficult it is to be a professional athlete. And I think some of that gets overlooked by the people who have the mentality that because you make millions upon millions of dollars and you have generational wealth, that you are no longer human and you no longer experience the same things that I do sitting behind a podcast mic or sitting on my couch watching ESPN. And I think that Kevin Durant isn't being aggressive enough tonight. Here's the thing. We will always know less than we think we do about what these athletes are dealing with in their lives on and off the court. And that's especially important to remember around this time of the year. I am not a huge Steve Kerr fan, but I do admire the way that Steve Kerr interacts with his players. There was a story that came out with the Warriors locker room right before the Andrew Wiggins trade, right before they got Jimmy Butler. And Steve Kerr essentially walked in, addressed the team man to man, and let everybody know at the same time what was happening. And there were some reporters outside the locker room when he came out, and there had been consistent. He had sunken shoulders, and he had a very disgruntled, pestered look on his face, as if he was bothered by the fact that Andrew Wiggins and Kyle Anderson, probably more so Andrew Wiggins, were getting moved. And it's the human aspect. Mike Breen was on the Roommates podcast, the Jalen Brunson, Josh Hart podcast, and he was talking about, how difficult it really is to get traded. Right? You build real relationships with these guys. Austin Reeves talked about it too, right? His relationship with Anthony Davis and even Max Christie too, right? When you go to war and you really just put it all out there every day with the same guys for years upon. Most of the closest friends that I have in my life, people who I consider brothers, people who I would do a lot of things for. I'd go to the end of the year. Things I have done, people who I've done tons of things for. I played college baseball with. I spent 2, 3, 4 years with these people, really developing these relationships. And when you're on the field together and you're grinding it out 3-4 hours a day, and then you're going to study hall, and then you have weights, and you're spending an extremely large amount of time with these people on such a consistent basis, you really do develop a strong relationship with these people. And I don't think that relationship gets mitigated at the professional level. I actually think it gets heightened, right? Because you're not only dealing with the pressure of being a professional athlete, but you share unique experiences that people outside that world don't experience. I can't go ask my mom for help dealing with social media banter as an NBA player. She can give me advice, oh honey, don't listen to the noise, but she can't offer me any real practical advice or any sort of apathy or relatability to my situation. And so all of this to say, let's cut the crap. This mostly stems from a lot of people having takes on Mark Williams, and not just who he was as a player, but who he is as a person. Khalil Ware too. Khalil Ware coming out of the draft, a lot of questions about his motor and, how's he going to fit in Miami? This guy barely even plays hard at Indiana, so how are we going to expect blah, blah, blah? And now Khalil Ware is starting and looks really impactful next to Bam. Or, do we think that Mark Williams wants to be hurt? Do we think that he doesn't want to be on the court? It boggles my mind sometimes how people can give these egregiously uneducated and illogical takes just for the sake of giving the takes. And all in all, this is the issue that we have with the way that social media works. It's been such a poison to minds. And obviously me even doing this podcast is a product of social media, right? The whole point is putting this out there for people to consume and people to enjoy. But the manner in which we do it has to be so intentional and so specific. When we're criticizing people and we're giving takes and ideas on things that we just quite frankly don't know anything about, we're not only doing a disservice to ourselves, but we're doing a disservice to the people that we're placing the judgment on. And so I just encourage all of us in general, whether it's professional athletes, whether it's your friends, whether it's just a random stranger that disagrees with you on the internet, let's remember that these are actual individuals and humans that we're talking to. They feel the same emotions that we do. They deal with a lot of the same stuff that we do. And just like the professional athletes have their shared experiences, us as regular people have shared experiences as well. Things that impact us that don't impact professional athletes, and we don't have sympathy for each other. I don't know. I know that was a weird rant to close the episode, but just something that I was pondering, especially during this trade time and how teams, fans are reacting to either a player they wanted gone or a guy that they got in, whatever that looks like. Just kind of bugged me a little bit. But that's all. Thank you again for watching and tuning in to the Above the Break podcast. I told y'all last episode that was the worst the content was going to be. That was the worst it was going to be, and here we are. And let me know, is this improved content? Drop something in the comments, man. Y'all were not supportive in the comments. And I know who you are, who was supposed to comment and didn't. I'm going to remember this. All right, so I'll catch you.